This isn't always the prettiest topic to talk about, but how would constipation cause you to feel bloated? So when we're constipated, it means that there's food inside of the digestive tract that is either undigested or simply just not moving quickly. And when food sits in the digestive system, it gets fermented by our gut bacteria. If the thing that is causing your constipation is a backup in the large intestine, then these bacteria will begin to produce gas which will travel up into your stomach because it can't travel out the other end because there's food in the way. But let's say this is because there's undigested food sitting inside of the small intestine. This can cause what is called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or more commonly known as SIBO. So as I mentioned, there are bacteria inside of our large intestine that can ferment undigested food. But when we have a lot of food sitting inside of the small intestine, they can begin to migrate out of the large intestine up into the small intestine. And this can cause worse symptoms of bloating because the higher up in our digestive system these bacteria are, the more of the food that we eat they will begin to ferment. And the less of the food that we eat we will be able to absorb. And there are actually a few very common causes of this that I see in people that come to me with this issue. The first is going to be the chronic use of proton pump inhibitors. This will decrease our stomach acid and cause more food to go undigested, meaning there's more fuel available to be fermented. The next is eating a lot of undigestible foods, especially when you have this low stomach acid issue. And unfortunately, these foods include a lot of the raw fruits and vegetables, but also includes things like nuts, beans, and seeds. These are the main carbohydrates in our diet that will be fermented by our bacteria and are the most likely to go undigested. The next are taking pre- and probiotic supplements, because oftentimes these will release inside of the small intestine and not the large intestine. And these supplements will increase the amount of bacteria at whatever location they are released in. So if they get released too early because we digested the capsule, they can increase our susceptibility to small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And this is why I do not recommend taking pre- and probiotic supplements. And now the other thing is actually taking fiber supplements or ingesting a lot of fiber without sufficient water. Now, unlike some people, I don't think that fiber is absolutely harmful. But I also don't think that the more fiber is always better. There's a certain amount of fiber that we can tolerate and move through our digestive system sufficiently so that it will make it to our large intestine where we want this fiber to actually be fermented by our gut bacteria. Or, in the case of insoluble fiber, will simply just go all the way through our large intestine undigested, but on its way may actually be able to pick up some debris inside of our large intestine, and this unabsorbed fiber will simply be excreted in the stool, along with some of the bacteria or buildup inside of our large intestine that bound to the fiber as it was moving through. But if we do not drink sufficient water, there's a much greater likelihood that we'll actually have problems with this fiber. In the case of a soluble fiber, which is able to be fermented by our gut bacteria, if we don't stay properly hydrated to allow this fiber to move through the small intestine, it can stay in the small intestine for longer, making it more likely that bacteria will begin to ferment it inside of the small intestine. And then these bacteria can replicate at the site of fermentation, which causes a bacterial buildup inside of the small intestine. But in the case of insoluble or unabsorbable fiber, if we don't have sufficient hydration to move it through the intestinal tract, it can get stuck inside of the intestinal tract, causing constipation. And then any food that gets fermented by the bacteria, whether it be fiber or other fermentable carbohydrates, because we have this large mass of insoluble fiber inside of our large intestine, the gas cannot go downwards and be excreted through flatulence, so it will travel upwards and either be excreted through burping or just cause symptoms of bloating. So those are some of the common causes of a coexisting constipation and bloating. But what do you do about it? My best recommendation is actually to try what's referred to as a low FODMAP diet. This is a diet that will remove most of the carbohydrates that are easily fermentable by the bacteria inside of our intestinal tract. And yes, this will cause us to decrease the amount of bacteria inside of our intestine. But if we have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, this is probably a good thing. And once we've done a low fermentable diet for a long period of time, it's likely we'll begin to have bacteria inside of the large intestine where we want it, but not inside of the stomach or small intestine where we do not want it. Which is when we can reintroduce foods that are able to be fermented by these bacteria, which inside of the large intestine can be extremely beneficial, because these bacteria can produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, the most common being butyrate. And these short-chain fatty acids can actually be used as energy inside of our intestinal cells, and a greater fuel supply to the cells inside of our intestinal tract the easier it is for them to repair and regrow and keep our digestive system healthy. And these short-chain fatty acids have a myriad of benefits that would be too long for this video. But I honestly think the most important first step for anyone who has bloating is to reduce the amount of bacteria inside of their small intestine by going on a low fermentable diet like a low FODMAP diet. I would also want to take steps to increase stomach acid so we can properly break down food before it enters the small and large intestine, which would make it much easier to be broken down inside of our small intestine and absorbed. If you have very low stomach acid, you could try a stomach acid supplement like betaine HCl. But I also recommend zinc lozenges. And I made a video on this in the past, but the long and short of it is zinc is required for the production of stomach acid. But when we have low stomach acid, we won't be able to break down and absorb a zinc supplement. But a zinc lozenge is partially dissolved inside of our mouth, making it easier to break down and absorb the zinc, which can allow us to absorb zinc and increase production of stomach acid. And once we have the stomach acid and the bacteria inside of the right place, we can then start adding in some of the more beneficial fibers like carrots, asparagus, potatoes, and other fruits and vegetables.